Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. Hope you've been doing well. It's been a while. At the moment, my rhythm with the publication of videos is a little slowed down, I guess. But you know, it's linked to the context in which I am at the moment, and probably also kind of an adaptation with regard to the sort of rhythm that I might prefer embracing, in the near future to sort of keep this theme going. Regardless, in this video, I would like to just share with you some thoughts I have had floating in my mind regarding the topic of intensity. What does it mean to be intense? But not just that, which could be seen as a philosophical question, or at least a question that's phrased philosophically, which is something that I like to do. But also, considering the various ways in which one might be considered intense or not intense. So perhaps we could try to fit this conversation into, or rather fit what I know you like most, what I know you're here for, guys, the MBTI typology thing, functions, Jung, all these things, fit into this broader discussion of what does it mean for someone to be intense, how are different kinds of intensity manifested, and how do we relate to that? Like, do we like it? Do we dislike it? Do we need a bit of it? Do we need a lot of it? Do we need none at all? Do you yourself believe that you're a little intense? Have you been told that you were a little intense? How do you experience that? How do you feel about it? Do you think it's fair? Do you identify with that? All this, I'm interested, and I want you guys to let me know if you have a story to share in the comments. Because if there is one thing that is sometimes mentioned in regard to the INFJ type, let's say, the type that many of us here are, is that we have some kind of intensity. Intensity, so far we haven't really defined it, but it's something that is mentioned in descriptions of INFJs that are, I think, halfway decent or can claim to being somewhat comprehensive. So you will probably not find that mention in the 16 personalities description, of course. This is my jab at this terrible test. I'm only joking. But you know what I mean. So there is mention of the intensity of the INFJ. What could be the other types, do you think? And that's again before we try to go into the detailed kind of understanding of what intensity means. What are the other types that you think intuitively are associated with some kind of intensity? Either in the descriptions you've read, or in your personal experience, or maybe in personal experiences which you have shared with other people, and you've come to some kind of agreement that there are certain types that are intense. Whatever intense means, at the moment we're just functioning with an ordinary language, intuitive understanding of, the word. So what I think is striking is that it seems that the intense types, among the intense types, not all of them are intense. So for example, I would not say that an ISFJ is intense. I would not say that an ISFP is intense. Maybe some people would disagree with this, actually, because I know that some people who thought, some treacherous heathens, I'm joking again, who thought that my brother in the videos that I made with him was an ISFP rather than INFP. Sometimes what was adduced as corroborating evidence was that he seemed to have some intensity in the way he looked or in the way he was. Now, he's an INFP, a type that also would consider not particularly intense intuitively. What is striking, to refer back to what I said just earlier, is that all the N-dominant types strike me as intense. So, I mean INFJ, of course, but INTJ, and INTJs are described as the preeminently intense type, probably because of their supposedly very icy or hard stare. ENFPs and ENTPs are often seen as intense in a different way, and I would agree with that. Having spent like part of an evening yesterday with an ENFP friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a long time, acted in my first 2 plays that I wrote and directed in college. And God, I can put the finger on like where that intensity is coming from now. It's definitely any. So we have the four N-dominant types that I think qualify each in their own way as intense. Now, next to that, I would say that, you might say that ENTJs perhaps are intense in their own way. So maybe let's include them. There's perhaps an intensity to the way that ENTJs are. I don't think ENFJs are particularly intense. I mean, I have never experienced an intense ENFJ or an intense ESFJ. Among sensors, I could say like the ones that have struck me at times as being a little intense are the ESTPs, and I guess potentially the ESFPs as well. So what you notice here is that, I didn't include INTPs either. I think INTPs are brilliant a lot of the time, but I wouldn't necessarily qualify them as intense, although maybe they are in some way, but not in the traditional sense in which I would understand the word. So let's just leave them aside for now. So what we'll notice by counting these 6 examples, the 4 N-dominants and ESFPs and ESTPs, is that literally the 6 types that I selected there, and you might agree, disagree with me, please don't hesitate to share, are, in fact, they're all intuitive dominants. Among the sensors, 2 extroverted intuitives. Among the intuitives, all of the intuitives. So what's interesting is that it seems that extroverted perception as a dominant almost ensures or makes very likely that the person comes across as a little intense, which could be sort of associated with the fact that if these are people who kind of primarily relate to the perception of their environments in an extroverted way, perhaps that manifests as intense to people who are not used to that kind of directness. But notice that only the introverted among the intuitives, or rather among the perceivers, only the introverted intuitive dominants are included. So, not including ISTJs and ISFJs. Now, if you were to believe that Heidegger, for example, is an ISTJ philosopher, it's very clear in his writing that he is very intense. But I have never met Heidegger. I don't know what he was like in real life. Plus, I don't believe that he was an ISTJ. So, I'm not going to count him in this case. I would say that the majority of ISTJs I met in real life and ISFJs I met in real life I would not consider to be intense. So the 2 questions here would then be why. So maybe there's like 3 questions here. First is, why are most of the intense types, or all of the intense types, usually dominant perceivers? So we have answered part of the question, maybe by saying that like there is a certain directness of engagements with one's world that comes with being an extroverted perceiver, which it's almost like when you engage with a particular object in your field of vision, like you jump straight to the object instead of like going through a filter, and the filter comes sort of afterwards. And so you've already expressed something. It's like it doesn't go through that filter. And so for those who have the kind of filter, it's almost like a little bit of a shield that has to be passed through. Experiencing someone that doesn't have that, or has a very much thinner one, just can be experienced as intense, just in the same way that like looking at the sun and being blinded by it can be blinding, you know, an intense light. It's like something that we're not used to is stronger than what we're used to in terms of engagement with one's world, which also means that oftentimes we experience dominance, extroverted intuitives, ENFPs or NTPs, as having a very fast, very flexible and fast, lightning fast mode of ideation, maybe a little scattered sometimes, but so fast, you know, that it's hard to keep up with them. So there's this kind of overwhelmingness to the experience, which actually is also very enjoyable, I think, especially for an introverted intuitive, but nevertheless that happens. And then in the case maybe of ESTPs and ESFPs, there is a sense in which the intensity of their engagement with the external world and being projected toward the external world via their extroverted perception, in this case sensing, manifests itself more in more practical engagement with the environment. So you could take the extreme or the rather cliche example of, like, you know, people who are of that type, or those two types that are very daring or very, like, you know, who engage life in this very kind of almost like bigger than life kind of way, larger than life way, party animal type way. You know, they engage the environment in a way that we feel like if we were that way, we would get so drained and so tired so quickly. And so that can be experienced as overwhelming for us, and therefore as intense. So again, like, that explains why extroverted intuitives, or extroverted perceivers, I should say, belong to that category. But then the second question that's connected to this first one is, how come only the introverted perceivers of the intuitive variety are included, INTJs and INFJs, and not the other one? I beg your pardon. So that's the second question linked to the first. And then the third question, which is kind of the overarching question, is, what does that say about intensity, and how can we then define intensity instead of, or, you know, as a sort of further step from, like, having relied upon it from the start, in the common sense understanding of the word, in the intuitive understanding of the word. So maybe it is this kind of like, it feels, you know, that when someone is intense is when we experience someone as having a certain overwhelmingness of something, a surplus that kind of, you know, simmers. Like, if you imagine a pot and it simmers and it threatens to overflow. So in the case of the extroverted intuitives, it could be the ideation, scattered ideation, very much overwhelming in the sense of its expansion. In the case of the extroverted sensors, it could be, or the extroverted, sensors, that's exactly what it is, it could be this overwhelming, thrill-seeking engagement with the world in a more practical sense, rather than an ideating sense. Now, in the case of the introverted perceivers, what could be the overwhelming or the surplus, this threatening to explode thing that creates this sense of intensity and can overwhelm the other person? Again, overwhelm is not really the term, because it's not, it can be overwhelming, especially in the case of the extroverts, but not the case of the introverts, not as much. Like, you wouldn't necessarily describe an INFJ as overwhelming. You wouldn't describe an INTJ as overwhelming. Notice that these are the only two introverts I included in my list of intense people, or types. So they're intense, but they're not overwhelming in the way in which we traditionally understand, but I kind of would like to keep the definition of intensity as this implicit or tacit overwhelmingness. Maybe that's what it is. It's more tacit in the case of the introverted intuitives. It's not in your face necessarily, it's more something that's boiling somewhere. It's like inside someone's mind, or it'd be too easy to say it's in their eyes, you know. And of course, okay, like INTJs sometimes they have stairs, and sometimes INFJs have stare. Maybe it's harder in the case of INTJs, softer in the case of INFJs. But it's a bit of a cop out. It's a bit too easy to say it's their stairs, how they manifest, you know, because the stare, and I was trying to make that point in the video I made on the stare, is that it's not just a physical thing. I mean, it is a physical thing insofar as it's manifested physically, but it comes from a place, you know, of what the person is like, how they think, how they engage with the world, maybe their functional makeup. So what is it? What is it that's overwhelming in the INFJ and the INTJ that is not overwhelming directly, but is kind of implicitly sort of under the surface, that cannot be replicated by an introverted sensor, supposedly, because introverted sensors are not intense as much? Well, that's a good question. I think that perhaps what's perceived as intense is this constant process of convergence that NI is attempting to realize almost or mostly unconsciously, which means that when you are engaging with an INFJ type or an INTJ type, their dominant mode of engagement with you, with things, is to gather information, SE data, let's say, along the NI-SE axis, and constantly trying to converge toward a sort of synthesis of, you know, all these disparate elements. And it's almost as if, you know, when you're at your computer and you start playing a movie that's like very heavy, a beautiful Game of Thrones episode, you know, like super HD, and your computer is, you know, it's good, but it's you're gonna notice it starts running and it makes more noise. It's like, you know, it requires more power. That's the intensity of the INFJ and the INTJ, I think. And what makes the noise, the processor, if you like, it is NI. And it's manifested, the overwhelmingness is there. It's like in this intensity rather than this extensity, this intensity of concentration, which is often an unconscious concentration, to arrive at the synthesis of the different elements that were gathered to begin with via SE. And I guess that's where I will stop. Let me know what you think, guys. Let me know if you relate to what I described and how you would, you know, categorize intense types. If you have some to add, and if you have some types to add, how would you describe their intensity? See you soon. Have a lovely week. See you guys.